The year was 1885, and Thorn Creek baked under a sun that showed no mercy. Heat clung to the wooden bones of the town like a fever, warping the porch rails, drawing sweat from the skin of men who'd long forgotten shame. Inside the Silverjack Saloon, the air was thick enough to chew, smoke, whiskey, dust, and breath all stewing together. On the raised platform near the far wall, a girl stood barefoot in a white dress, too thin to hide the trembling underneath. Vernon Pike banged his gavel against the bar. "Gentlemen, what we have here is purity itself," he drawled, and the crowd laughed, the kind of laugh that smells of rot. Ella Finch stared straight ahead, her fingers knotted in front of her like she was holding herself in place. She was 19 and looked younger under the glare of the oil lamps. The sound of coins clinking made her flinch harder than the catcalls. The bids began low, 50, 60, 70. Each word falling heavier than the last. Sweat ran into the crack of the floorboards, turning the dust to mud beneath her feet. Someone shouted, "100!" Someone else whistled. She kept her chin lifted, because she'd promised herself she would. Only the quick rise of her throat betrayed her. Behind the bar, Pike smirked and wiped his brow with a rag the color of rust. He liked a show that drew a crowd. To him, Ella wasn't a person. She was a number with a heartbeat. Her father had owed Pike more than money. He'd owed humiliation. The man died owing it still, and now she was paying in flesh. Through the saloon windows, the day outside burned like brass. The music had stopped long ago. Even the piano player couldn't stomach the tune this town was humming. A single fly circled the girl's face, landing on her cheek until she twitched it away. No one moved to stop it. No one ever did. Somewhere beneath the noise, her mind fled to the riverbank of her childhood, where her father used to wash ink from his hands after bookkeeping for the cattle yard. He'd smelled of paper and tobacco. That memory was all she had left of decency. A thin scar of ink still marked the inside of her wrist from those days. Vernon Pike's brand of servitude, though he called it employment. "120!" shouted a man with silver spurs. "140!" answered another, his laugh rolling into the rafters. The crowd pressed closer. The saloon smelled like animal breath. Then, a pause. The kind that makes the walls creak. Ella's gaze drifted toward the bat-wing doors, where a strip of light cut the gloom in half. For a heartbeat, it looked like a way out. Then the doors swung inward, banging against the frame, and sunlight poured through around the silhouette of a tall man dusted with road and distance. He took off his hat, slow as prayer, and the room stilled to listen. Malachi Boone stepped inside with the weariness of someone who'd ridden through both drought and regret. His coat hung open, spurs dull from use, eyes the color of turned soil. The kind of eyes that had seen too much, but forgot nothing. The gavel froze mid-air in Pike's hand. Nobody knew him well in Thorn Creek, only that he ran cattle north of the ridge, that he'd buried his wife 2 winters ago and that he kept mostly to himself. But the way he looked at the platform made even the drunkest man sober. "Gentlemen," Pike said too loudly, trying to reclaim the noise, Do I hear 160? Ella's heart stuttered. The stranger's gaze had found her, steady and unblinking. There was no lust in it, no pity either, only something harder to name. Recognition, maybe, or remembrance. Outside, a dry gust rattled the loose sign over the door, making the letters squeal. Malachi's hand hovered near the brim of his hat, then lowered. His other hand rested against his chest, just over the place where a bullet had once gone in and never truly come out. He said nothing, but his silence felt heavier than any bid. Somewhere in the crowd, Royce Maddox, the ranch baron whose shadow stretched over half the county, leaned forward, his grin curving like a blade. "Who's next to bid?" Pike barked, nervous now. No one answered. The dust hung still, and in that stillness, the girl on the platform realized something had shifted. Not in the room, but in the air around that stranger, as if he carried a promise he hadn't meant to make. The bat-wing doors creaked, again, wind whispering through like the breath before a storm. Pike's knuckles whitened on the gavel. Ella looked once more at the man in the doorway, and for the first time since morning, she felt the faint pulse of a heartbeat that wasn't fear. He hadn't yet spoken, but when he did, everything would change. The air in the Silverjack thickened the moment the stranger spoke. His voice came low, almost gentle, but it cut through the haze like a whip. 200. For a second, no one breathed. Then the room erupted. Chairs scraped, laughter broke, disbelief spilled like spilled beer. $200 wasn't a bid. It was a declaration. A ranch hand might work a year and never see that much. Pike's grin split wide, greed shining through the sweat on his temples. "Sold already, mister," he crooned, pretending calm. Malachi Boone didn't answer right away. He reached into the worn pocket of his coat and pulled out a roll of bills wrapped in twine. His fingers trembled just once, barely enough to notice, as he counted out the sum on the bar. Each note landed with the sound of finality. Behind him the men muttered, "Boone's gone soft. Or crazy. Black fool throwing away a winter's feed." He ignored them. His eyes stayed on Ella. She hadn't moved since his first word. Her breath came shallow, lips parted, eyes red from salt and fear. The thin strap of her dress had slipped down her shoulder, and she yanked it back, trembling. "I'll take the girl," he said, "but not for what you think." A low murmur rolled through the crowd, like thunder under the floorboards. Pike's hand hovered over the money. "You sure about that, Boone? Ain't no refunds in this business." "Wasn't asking for one." He turned to the stage. The light from the window struck his face in a hard line, half shadow, half sun. "Come on down, miss," he said softly. "You're done here." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then her knees gave out, and she caught the railing, forcing herself to stand. Each step down sounded too loud, like she was walking on her own grave. Time 600 scum. When her feet touched the ground, Malachi took off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. The gesture silenced the room. Even Pike stopped smirking. Ella looked up at him, lips trembling. "Why?" she whispered. Malachi met her gaze and something flickered behind his eyes. Something old and unhealed. "Because I was too late once," he said. "Won't be again." The words hung between them, heavy and unfinished. No one asked what he meant. No one dared. From the corner, Royce Maddox pushed back his chair, the wood screeching across the floor. "You just bought yourself a problem, Boone," he drawled. "That girl's got prior claim." Pike's smile faltered. Now, Maddox." "Don't now me," Maddox snapped. "You took my 50 last week for first rights. You sell her again. You're cheating me." His hand drifted to the silver grip of his Colt. The room tensed like a string pulled tight. Malachi didn't move. He shifted slightly, placing himself between Ella and the gun. "She ain't property," he said. "Not yours, not mine." Someone laughed nervously. Someone else spat. The sound of a fly buzzing near the whiskey glass filled the silence. Pike swallowed hard, torn between fear and profit. "Gentlemen," he said, voice cracking, "let's not spill blood over a transaction." But Maddox wasn't listening. His eyes were cold, predator bright. "You sure you want to make an enemy today, Boone?" Malachi's jaw flexed. "Ain't my first." Behind him, Ella clutched the edge of his coat, barely standing. In her mind, she heard her father's voice again, the one that used to say, "Debt's a noose, don't ever let them tie it around your neck." But it was too late for that. The rope had already burned her wrists. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the ridge, though the sky was still dry. The kind of sound that warned of a storm not yet seen. Maddox's fingers brushed his gun once, twice, a silent promise. Malachi exhaled slowly. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, the scent of whiskey, the pulse of his own blood beating behind his ribs. His right hand twitched near his belt, not for a weapon, but for the old scar over his heart. He had buried one mistake already. He wouldn't bury another. "I'll be taking her out that door," he said, calm as prayer. "If you mean to stop me, you'd best decide now." For a long moment, the saloon froze in the heat. Even the flies waited. Then Maddox smiled, an animal's smile. "Go on then," he said softly. "But remember, Boone, Thorn Creek ain't a big town. Roads here got long memories." Malachi took Ella's arm and steered her toward the bat-wing doors. His touch was careful, steady, as if she might break. The crowd parted without a word. Boots scraped, breath caught. Just before stepping into the sunlight, he paused. The smell of the saloon, sweat, fear, cheap whiskey, seared itself into memory. He knew this wasn't over. Neither did she. The gavel still lay on the counter, forgotten, one drop of sweat hanging from its handle. Then the doors swung shut behind them, cutting the noise in half. Outside, the street shimmered under a sky the color of bleached bone. And somewhere behind them, Maddox's laugh followed, like the echo of a promise yet to be paid. The noon sun hit Thorn Creek like a hammer, Heat shimmered above the dust, warping the line between ground and sky. The saloon doors swung once, then stilled behind them. Malachi Boone walked beside the girl, one hand steady on her elbow, the other holding his hat against the glare. She moved like someone learning to breathe again. Slow, uncertain, every step a test of will. Across the street, a black dog barked once, then slunk under a wagon. Windows blinked shut along the row of false fronts. The mercantile, the feed store, the post office. People vanished behind curtains as if fear itself were contagious. Malachi didn't blame them. He'd lived long enough to know how towns worked, what they worshipped, what they feared. Still, it burned in his chest, that quiet cowardice. "Keep close," he murmured. Ella said nothing. The coat he'd given her hung heavy on her shoulders, swallowing her thin frame. A lock of hair stuck to her cheek where a tear had dried. She clutched the fabric tighter, as though hiding inside a stranger's kindness might make it last longer. They passed Sheriff Dugan standing outside the telegraph office. His badge caught the light, but his eyes didn't. He glanced at the pair, spat into the dust, and turned away. Malachi slowed. "That your lawman?" Ella nodded faintly. "He takes his orders from whoever's got the fattest wallet." "Then the law's poor here," Malachi said, and they kept walking. At the end of the street stood the old courthouse, its flag limp in the heat. From the shadow of the doorway stepped Judge Aurelia Stone, tall, gray-haired, wearing a plain brown coat dusted from travel. She carried her presence like a weapon sharpened by habit. "Mr. Boone," she said, her voice firm, almost kind. "You've stirred a nest of hornets." "Didn't mean to," he replied. "Just couldn't stand watchin' no more." Her gaze slid to Ella, then back. "That child was about to be sold like stock. You did right. But it won't sit easy with certain men. Maddox owns half this town's debt." "I know who he is," Malachi said quietly. Aurelia studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "Take her and go before sundown. The sheriff won't stop Maddox, and I can't hold the law on air." "We'll be gone," he said. But as they turned, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A group of men outside the livery, watching. Their hands rested too easily on their belts. The world smelled of heat and the promise of violence. "Mr. Boone?" Ella's voice was thin as paper. "Why'd you come in there today?" He hesitated, squinting down the road where the sky blurred to silver. "Maybe I heard a sound I couldn't unhear." "What sound?" He didn't answer. A gust lifted the dust around them, whirling it into their faces. When it cleared, a small figure appeared at the far end of the street. Bare feet kicking up powder, a braid bouncing with each step. "Ba-oi!" The voice cracked the quiet open. Malachi's heart seized. "Alma?" he breathed. She ran faster, a bright scrap of childhood tearing through the mean light of Thorn Creek. He'd told her to stay with Mrs. Henderson, to wait until he came back. But here she was, running straight into danger with that open smile that could still break him. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice lost to the dry wind. Ella froze beside him, eyes wide. She could see what he saw. 3 of Maddox's men stepping out from the shade of the livery, their spurs catching sun, hands drifting toward their sides. Alma didn't see them. She only saw her father. The street seemed to narrow, the space between them shrinking and stretching all at once. The girl's laughter carried through the heat, too bright for the world it lived in. Malachi dropped his hat. The wind caught it, rolling it down the street as if to mark the distance he'd have to cross. Behind them, somewhere inside the saloon, Royce Maddox's voice rose, smooth, cruel, certain. Well now, the good rancher's got himself company. Malachi's pulse thudded in his ears. He could already feel the shape of the choice tightening around him, the kind that never left a man the same. The dog under the wagon started barking again, sharp, desperate, as if it knew what came next. And in that suspended second, sun blazing, dust hanging, men reaching, child running, Malachi Boone understood how fast heaven could turn into hell. The air held still when she reached him. Alma, breathless and glowing, her small hands clutching his belt. "I found you, Papa," she said between gasps. The words came like sunlight breaking into a storm. Malachi knelt, sweeping her close. "You weren't supposed to come," he murmured, voice cracking from the weight of both fear and relief. Her chest fluttered fast beneath his palm. The heat had turned the town into a furnace, and each breath she drew sounded like a match striking. Ella stood a step behind, coat still hanging from her shoulders. She looked from father to child and saw it. The tenderness that could undo a man faster than any bullet. Alma leaned against him, coughing once, a dry hitch that made his stomach twist. "Easy now," he said softly. He pulled a small tin from his pocket, shook it once, then opened it to reveal a thin inhaler fashioned from brass and glass. He pressed it to her lips. She breathed in, the sound wheezing, fragile, human, the kind of sound that reminded him what it cost to care for something that could be broken. Across the street, the onlookers had grown still. Even Sheriff Dugan shifted uneasily, wiping his brow but not moving closer. The law preferred distance when blood was about to spill. "You should go," Ella whispered. "Now, before he—" Her words died as Royce Maddox stepped from the doorway of the Silverjack. He moved slow, deliberate, hat tilted low, dust curling around his boots. The sunlight caught the metal of his revolver, a brief wink of cruelty. "Well," he drawled, "ain't this a picture? The hero, the whore, and the child." Malachi rose, setting Alma behind him, his hand resting lightly on her head. "You mind your tongue, Maddox." Maddox smiled, the kind that never reached the eyes. "I do when I choose." He looked at the girl clutching Malachi's coat. "Didn't know you kept pets." The insult landed like a slap. The crowd flinched but stayed silent. Thorn Creek had learned long ago that silence was cheaper than courage. "Time, Timms." Judge Aurelia Stone's voice carried from across the way. "Enough." She stepped forward, coat snapping in the wind. "You speak that way again, Royce, and I'll have you in my jail for disorderly conduct." He laughed. "You and what, Sheriff?" Dugan's hand hovered near his holster, but didn't draw. The badge on his chest might as well have been tin foil. Malachi shifted his weight, every sense tuned to the rhythm of Maddox's breathing. He could feel Alma trembling behind him, could feel the rasp of her next inhale. Thin, struggling. The wheeze cut through him sharper than any threat. Ella knelt beside the child, her own body shaking. "Here, sweet girl," she whispered, shielding Alma from the dust. Her fingers brushed the child's hair, gentle, almost reverent. The town's sound faded until only that breath remained. Ragged, small, but steady. "Touch them," Malachi said, voice low, "and you'll choke on your own dust before sundown." Maddox's grin tightened. "You sure you want to make that promise?" "I already did." A long silence stretched between them. The flag over the courthouse hung limp. Somewhere a shutter banged once in the wind. Aurelia stepped forward again. "That's enough, both of you. Boone, get your child and the girl out of my town. Maddox, holster that gun, or I'll convene court right here in the street." Her words were steady, but the tremor in her hand betrayed the fear she refused to show. Malachi bent, lifting Alma into his arms. "We're leaving," he said, eyes never leaving Maddox, "and we won't be back." He turned toward the hitching post, every step slow to keep the child from jarring. Ella followed, her face pale but set with something close to resolve. Behind them, Maddox's voice came again, quieter this time, the tone of a man already planning. "Roads out of town get mighty narrow. Wouldn't want you to fall off one." Malachi didn't look back. He settled Alma on the horse, checked her breathing once, more, and met Ella's eyes. "You can ride?" She nodded. "Then stay close. Don't stop for nothing." She swung up behind him, clutching the child between them. The horse stamped once, uneasy, sensing what hung in the air. Malachi clicked his tongue, and they started down the road that cut through Thorn Creek like a scar. Every face watched from behind a window. Every soul stayed silent. The sun was sinking now, laying fire across the dirt. A vulture circled above, black against gold. Halfway down the street, Malachi felt the heat break into wind, carrying a whisper from behind. Maddox's parting words, too faint for Alma to hear, but clear enough for him. "You can't outrun what you owe, Boone." He kept riding, jaw clenched, the weight of his daughter and the girl pressing against his back. But somewhere deep inside, an old fear woke, the kind that didn't need words to name itself. Evening crept over Thorn Creek like smoke. The sun hung low and red, bleeding into the dry horizon. Malachi Boone rode at a slow, careful pace, the leather reins creaking beneath his fingers. Alma leaned against his chest, breathing shallow but steady now, her small hand tangled in his shirt. Behind them, Ella kept close, her borrowed coat snapping in the wind. The prairie opened wide and empty, the kind of emptiness that made a man feel watched. Sparse sage and stone. No sound but hooves and the whine of wind through the grass. The farther they rode, the thinner the light became, until it turned the world the color of ash. "We're nearly clear," Malachi murmured, mostly to himself. Ella heard him anyway. Clear of what? He didn't answer. Some truths were best left behind until daylight. The road dipped into a narrow pass where red rock walls rose on both sides. Locals called it Devil's Wash, a place where horses spooked and echoes carried whispers like curses. He'd crossed it before in daylight, and even then it had felt wrong. Tonight, it felt like a throat waiting to close. The first sound was small, a stone clattering down the slope. Then another. Malachi pulled the horse to a halt. The air went dead still. Even Alma stirred, sensing something beyond her dreams. "Get down," he said quietly. Ella slid off, boots sinking into the dust. The wind carried the faint scent of gun oil. Her heart began to drum, too loud for her own ears. From the ridge above came the voice of Royce Maddox, smooth as whiskey, sharp as a broken bottle. "You didn't think I'd let you ride home easy, did you, Boone?" Malachi's jaw tightened. He moved quickly, lifting Alma down and tucking her behind a boulder. "Stay down. Don't move," he whispered. "Papa." "I'll be right here." The sky had turned to bruised purple, the kind of color that promised nothing good. 6 silhouettes lined the ridge, rifles glinting faintly. "You ain't got nowhere to run," Maddox called. "Road's narrow, canyon's high. Give the girl back, and maybe I let the rest of you keep breathing." Ella pressed her back against the rock, whispering, "He'll kill you even if you do." "I know," Malachi said, "but he ain't getting her." A single shot cracked the dusk, kicking dust inches from his boot. Alma whimpered, and he turned, shielding her with his body. The echo rolled down the canyon like thunder looking for somewhere to land. "First miss was a warning," Maddox shouted. "Next one won't be." Malachi drew his old revolver. The metal was cold, too light for comfort. 6 chambers, 3 bullets. He hadn't loaded the rest since the war ended. He took a slow breath, counted the voices above. 4 on the left ridge, 2 on the right. Too many. Ella crawled closer. "You can't fight them all." "I ain't trying to," he said, eyes fixed on the shadows. "I'm buying you time to run." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving her." Something inside him softened, though the danger pressed close. "You shouldn't have to see this again," he murmured, the past flickering through his voice. A flash, muddy rain, another girl, another mistake, her face fading into the storm. The memory bit deep and vanished, leaving the taste of regret. Another gun barked, the bullet whining off stone near Ella's shoulder. She ducked, gasping. "Boone!" Maddox's voice rose, jagged with fury. "You think you can hide behind rocks forever? Hand her over and walk away. Be smart for once in your life." Malachi almost smiled at that. Smart don't always mean right. The wind picked up, carrying grit into their eyes. Ella wiped hers, blinking hard. Her gaze fell on her own hands, scarred from kitchen work, stained faintly with ink that never fully washed out. The old mark caught the fading light, and with it came a thought. A desperate, impossible thought. "Malachi," she whispered. "He won't listen to mercy, but his men will." He glanced at her. "What are you thinking?" "I remember something from Pike's books. Maddox. He's been robbing his own partners blind. His men don't know." "You sure?" She nodded. "Every sale, every head of cattle, he skims 20%. I wrote the numbers. They trusted him." Malachi frowned, another bullet slapping stone above them. "You talkin' can stop a gun?" "Not him," she said, voice trembling, "but maybe the ones he pays." The next shot came closer, a warning carved from lead. Alma whimpered, clutching her father's sleeve. Ella took a breath that felt like the edge of courage. "Let me try." Malachi looked at her for a long heartbeat. The way a man looks at something fragile he knows he can't protect. Then he nodded once. The wind screamed through Devil's Wash, lifting her hair, pulling dust from the ground. Ella stood. Her shadow rose against the red stone like a ghost coming back to life. "Royce Maddox!" she shouted, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You want to know why Pike sold me so cheap? You want to know what he's been hiding from you?" The echo carried the words far, bouncing from ridge to ridge, reaching every ear that held a rifle. Above, someone shifted uncertainly. Malachi's heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. The canyon waited to decide if it would echo gunfire or truth. The canyon held its breath. Ella stood in the open, small against the rock wall, hair whipped by the wind, voice carrying where bullets could not. Her words rose clear, sharp, cutting through dust and distance. "Pike kept books," she shouted. "Ledger numbers. Every deal, every head of cattle, every sale you made, Royce Maddox. He took 20% off the top and marked it transport losses. He's been stealing from his own men." The echo bounced back at her, a second voice repeating the accusation. A rifle lifted on the ridge, then lowered again. Someone whispered, "She's lying." But another man muttered, "Maybe she ain't." Malachi crouched behind the boulder, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Alma clung to his arm, silent now, wide-eyed and pale. "Ella," he hissed, "get down." She didn't move. "You shoot me now, and your own men will start asking questions," she called out. "They'll start looking for the money that was theirs." Silence. Then a single voice, one of the gunmen. "You got proof, girl?" Ella took a step forward, dust swirling at her boots. "In Pike's office, back wall under the painting of a deer. False board left side. It's all written there. Every lie, every dollar." The men exchanged glances, the tension fracturing like ice underfoot. Maddox's voice tore through the quiet. "Don't listen to her," he roared. "She's a whore and a liar. You think I'd steal from my own?" But doubt had already entered the air. It moved through his ranks like fever. Slow, invisible, deadly. Malachi saw it, in the way the rifles wavered, in the way the men's silhouettes shifted against the ridge. He rose just enough to meet Ella's eyes. She was trembling, but her chin stayed high. He thought of Ruth again. Another woman, another moment he hadn't reached in time, but this time he was here. "Royce," Malachi called, his voice low and steady. "You built your empire on fear. Fear don't last when folks start seeing who's holding the knife." Maddox snarled, firing a wild shot that shattered rock near Ella's feet. She flinched, but didn't fall. "Get her down," one of the men yelled. "No," another shouted. "Let her talk." The canyon erupted, not in gunfire, but in noise. Men shouting, arguing, the old order cracking open. Ella's voice rose again, stronger now. "You don't have to die for him. He'll blame you before he hangs for his own crimes. He always has." The wind carried her words down the pass, spreading them like seeds. From the far end of the canyon came new sounds. Hooves, fast and hard. Malachi turned toward the noise, heart lifting. Riders, 8 or 9, cloaked in trail dust and determination. Doc Whitman led the front, coat flapping, rifle across his saddle. Beside him rode Reverend Hattie Lee, hat pinned tight against the wind. Behind them, Merchant Mei Chen and a handful of townsmen, faces set with something that looked dangerously like courage. "Hold your fire!" Doc shouted, voice echoing. "This ends now." For a moment, time stretched thin. Wind, dust, voices, all caught between fight and surrender. Malachi stood beside Ella, revolver lowered. "You did good," he said quietly. She looked at him, throat tight. "It's not over yet." He nodded once. "No, but it's starting to be." Above them, Maddox's shadow shifted, retreating just a step. He could feel his control slipping. The thread of fear he'd woven through this town unraveling with every echo of her voice. Malachi turned toward the sound of the approaching riders, their silhouettes breaking against the fading sun. He holstered his gun and placed a hand on Ella's shoulder. "You bought us a chance. Let's make it count." From somewhere behind the ridge, a crow cawed. Sharp, black, final. The canyon seemed to exhale, but before anyone could breathe easy, a rifle cracked again. This time not aimed at Ella, but toward the riders coming to help. The shot screamed through the twilight, striking sparks off stone. Malachi's instincts snapped. "Down!" he roared, pulling Ella behind the rock as Alma cried out. Dust flew, echoing the gun's thunder. Somewhere above, someone shouted, "He's lost it! Maddox has lost his damn mind!" And in the chaos that followed, the first stars appeared over Devil's Wash, cold and watching. By the time the echoes faded, night had nearly taken the canyon. The last of the sun bled out along the ridges, leaving the world the color of rust and smoke. Doc Whitman's riders dismounted in a rush, rifles drawn but pointed low, faces grim beneath the dimming sky. "Enough!" Judge Aurelia Stone's voice rang out as she rode in behind them, coat snapping like a flag in the wind. "Nobody fires another shot unless I say so." The command cracked through the chaos. The gunmen hesitated, lowering their weapons out of habit more than obedience. Maddox stood on the ridge, his shadow long and warped. The moment hung between order and ruin. Aurelia swung down from her horse, boots striking the dust. "We settle this here," she said, turning toward the gathered townsfolk. "This canyon's a court now. You want law, or you want blood?" No one answered. Somewhere behind her, Reverend Hattie murmured a prayer that carried like wind through dry grass. Malachi stepped forward, still shielding Alma and Ella behind him. His face looked older under the dying light, creased, tired, but steady. "She's got the proof," he said. "Let her speak." Aurelia nodded once. "Then let her." Ella moved forward slowly, the dust rising around her feet like ghosts. "I worked for Pike," she began, her voice raw from shouting. "He kept ledgers for Maddox's cattle business. He made me copy them, every number, every deal." Doc Whitman opened his satchel, pulling out a notebook bound in cracked leather. "Found this in Pike's office," he said. "Hidden behind a painting, just where she said." He handed it to Aurelia, who flipped it open under the lantern light. Her eyes scanned the pages, neat rows of figures, dates, and false tallies. "Lord above," she whispered, "he's been robbing every rancher in this county." A murmur swept through the men on the ridge. One spat into the dirt. Another cursed under his breath. The ground itself seemed to shift as loyalty wavered. Maddox's voice came hard and brittle. "That don't prove nothin'. That book could be faked." Aurelia looked up at him. "It's got your signature, Royce. Page 31. The wind stirred, and the sound that came from Maddox's throat wasn't quite words. Something between rage and disbelief. Reverend Hattie lifted her lantern higher. "Every lie has its light, son. You best choose what you stand in now." Sheriff Dugan, silent till then, stepped from the shadows. "Judge, maybe we let this rest till mornin'. Things look different in daylight." His voice was slick, tired, too careful. Aurelia's gaze sharpened. Or maybe they looked too clear. Dugan swallowed. "I only meant—" But before he could finish, Doc Whitman pulled a crumpled envelope from Dugan's vest pocket. "You mean this?" he said, holding it up. The paper bore Pike's scrawl and a wax seal half broken. "Letter says you've been taking hush money from Maddox. That true, Sheriff?" Dugan froze, sweat gleaming on his temples. It ain't what it looks like." "Then what is it?" Aurelia asked. No answer came. The crowd's murmur rose again. Restless now. Even the wind seemed to lean closer. Aurelia closed the ledger, voice calm but cold. "Until further notice, you're relieved of duty, Sheriff Dugan. You'll stand for questioning come morning." The badge on his chest might as well have turned to lead. He tore it off and threw it into the dirt, muttering something no one cared to hear. Above them, Maddox shifted, fury burning through his stillness. "You think you can bury me with paper?" he shouted. "You'll need more than ink to take what's mine." Aurelia stepped closer, lantern light painting her face gold. "We'll use truth then," she said. It lasts longer. A long silence followed, deep enough to hear the rustle of bats leaving their crevices in the cliffs. Ella looked at Malachi. Her lips moved soundlessly, but he understood. Is it over? He shook his head. Not yet. Paper don't stop bullets. Aurelia's eyes flicked to the eastern ridge. Doc, Reverend, fetch the rest. We'll move to town at first light. Maddox, you and your men stay put till we're ready to hear your side. Maddox's laugh slithered through the night. You really think I'm waiting for dawn? The wind shifted. Malachi's hand went to his revolver. No, he said quietly. You're waiting for darkness. The first flash came a second later, gunfire lighting the ridge like lightning from hell. The field court broke apart in screams and shouts. Malachi pushed Ella and Alma down behind the wagon, bullets whining past their heads. Stay low! Above the chaos, Aurelia shouted for order, her lantern spinning in the dust before it shattered. The only light left came from muzzle flashes and the thin, cold stars. Somewhere behind the gunfire, Malachi heard Maddox laugh again, a deep, hungry sound that promised more blood before morning. Night thickened around the canyon until even the stars looked tired. Smoke curled low, hugging the ground like fog. The gunfire had stopped, but the echo lingered. A ghost of thunder trapped between the cliffs. Malachi crouched behind an overturned wagon, breathing through the sting of powder in the air. Ella pressed Alma close beneath his arm. The child's small hands were clamped over her ears, trembling. When the silence finally settled, it was too deep to trust. Then came a voice, broken, ragged, still sharp enough to cut. Judge Stone, Maddox called from the ridge, his tone ragged but proud. You wanted the truth? I'll give it to you. A lantern flared somewhere near him, half blinding in the dark. His face glowed in its light, half angel, half ruin. Dust streaked the sweat on his jaw. Blood had soaked through his sleeve. He didn't look beaten, only dangerous in a new way. I never stole from these men, he said, raising his voice so the canyon would carry it. I gave to them. You think Thorn Creek had water in the drought? You think those wells dug themselves? No one answered. The silence bent around him. Ask Doc Whitman who paid for the first pump, he went on. Ask Mei Chen who kept her store open when the rails closed. I built this town, fed it, saved it. And this is how you repay me? By hanging me on numbers? Doc stepped into the half-light, rifle at his side. You didn't give, Royce. You traded. You made every man's gratitude into debt. Maddox smiled thinly. Debt keeps folks honest, makes them remember who pulled them through the dust. A murmur spread among his men. Some lowered their guns, others looked to the ground. Aurelia's voice rose, steady and cold. Good deeds don't wash out crimes, Maddox. A man can build a well and still poison it. Spoken like someone who's never gone thirsty. He laughed softly, the sound cracking like ice. You all think you want freedom, but freedom's got a price too. I was the only one willing to pay it. Malachi, felt the words crawl under his skin. He'd heard this sermon before, from men who wore uniforms, from men who built fences across what didn't belong to them. Power always sounded noble when it came from the mouth of a tyrant. He rose from behind the wagon, voice low. Maybe that's your curse, Royce. You think ownin' means savin'. Maddox turned his head slowly toward him. You got a smart mouth for a man who owes me a grave. Maybe, Malachi said, but I plan to keep it empty. The crowd shifted, restless between law and loyalty. Somewhere, a horse stamped the earth, the sound sharp in the dark. Ella stepped forward then, voice quiet but firm. You say you saved them, but look around you. Every man here's got a chain in his heart, and you forged it yourself. Her words hung there, soft but impossible to ignore. One of Maddox's own men lowered his rifle completely. He took from my herd last spring, the man muttered. Said it was tax. Another nodded, shame heavy in his throat. Same with mine. Maddox's jaw worked like stone grinding stone. You all forget who kept your bellies full. No, said Reverend Hattie, stepping into the circle of light. They remember too well. Gratitude don't mean servitude. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, the sound of fear cracking open to something stronger. Maddox's voice lost its polish. You all think this changes something? You think the law's gonna save you? When the judges leave, when the marshals ride out, you'll still be begging men like me to feed you. No, Aurelia said, lifting her chin. Not anymore. A sound came from the dark behind them. Hoofbeats, steady, rhythmic, coming closer. Maddox's eyes narrowed. Who's that? From the ridge beyond the canyon mouth came the glint of polished metal under moonlight. A voice answered, deep and commanding. Marshal Elias Rutledge, United States, Territorial Office. The marshal rode forward with 5 deputies, their badges catching the light. We heard gunfire from Thorn Creek, he said, and a whole lot of sins echoing off these rocks. Aurelia exhaled, the faintest tremor in her composure. You're just in time. Maddox's men exchanged looks, nervous now. The old order was breaking for good. Malachi holstered his revolver. You said freedom's got a price, Maddox, he murmured. Reckon it's time you paid yours. For the first time that night, Maddox didn't answer. The gray light made him look older, smaller, human. He stared down at the dust as though searching for something he'd dropped long ago. Maybe power, maybe peace, Tomas. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost tender. Ain't over, he whispered. It never is. The marshal raised his hand. Maybe not, but it's over for tonight. The wind rose, carrying smoke out of the canyon. In its wake came the first faint smell of rain. Rain came slow, like it had forgotten how to fall. A thin drizzle whispered across the canyon, cooling the dust and quieting the gun smoke. The townsmen had lowered their weapons. Maddox stood bound beside the marshal's horse, head bent, face unreadable in the faint light. But the night wasn't over. Judge Aurelia Stone gathered the crowd near the dying campfire, her voice steady though the wind tugged at her coat. Before we ride back to Thorn Creek, there's one more matter to settle, she said. Her gaze shifted toward Malachi Boone. You've carried yourself like a man with something left unsaid. Speak it now, or it'll haunt you worse than silence. Malachi stood still, rain seeping through his hat brim, tracing the creases of his face. His hand rested on Alma's shoulder, grounding him. Ella watched from nearby, her expression soft and uncertain, as though she could already sense the weight of what was coming. He looked up at the crowd, men and women who had once turned away from him in town, who now waited in uneasy quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't belong to strangers anymore. There's something you all ought to know, he began, voice low and slow, the sound of worn leather. This ain't the first time I tried to stand up to a man like Maddox. The rain tapped steady against the rocks. Nobody moved. Long time ago, back near Copper Bend, he went on, there was a girl named Ruth Callahan, worked the stables, got herself in trouble with a foreman who thought his coin could buy her soul. Folks knew, but they didn't speak. Said it wasn't their concern. I knew too, and I rode out anyway. Told myself I'd be back in the morning. He drew a breath that hurt. By the time I did, it was too late. They found her at the creek, rope on her wrist, blood in the water. Sheriff said she ran. I knew better. The fire hissed as a drop landed in its heart. Alma pressed closer, small and still. I've been riding ever since, Malachi said, trying to work off the sin of turning my back. Today, when I saw that girl on the platform, I saw Ruth again, and I swore to God I wouldn't ride away this time. His voice cracked on the last words, but he didn't hide it. No one spoke. The only sound was rain pattering on empty cartridges. Then Reverend Hattie stepped forward, her lantern flickering between them. You can't ride from ghosts, Malachi, she said softly. But you can walk beside them if you stop running. He nodded once, slow. I reckon that's what I'm trying to do. Judge Aurelia's face gentled. A man who confesses before he's accused is already halfway to freedom. Ella stepped closer, the coat he'd given her still wrapped tight. You saved us, she whispered. And maybe yourself, too. Malachi gave a faint smile, the kind that comes after years of not remembering how. Maybe. Or maybe I just got lucky twice in one lifetime. He turned his gaze toward Maddox, who watched from under the marshal's guard. That's the difference between us, Royce. I ran from guilt. You ran from mercy. Maddox's jaw clenched, but no words came. Marshal Rutledge broke the silence. We're taking him to Thorn Creek. Judge'll see to papers come morning. Boone, you and the women best ride separate. Can't promise his friends won't come sniffing round before daylight. Malachi nodded. We'll head north by the wash. I know a ridge road. As the marshal's men led Maddox away, the sound of hooves echoed hollow through the rain. The townfolk lingered, unsure whether to pray or to breathe. Ella laid a hand on Malachi's sleeve. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, she said quietly. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the girl he'd saved, but the woman who had saved him right back. "I reckon I don't," he murmured. He lifted Alma into the saddle and turned once more toward the east, where the first thin line of dawn pressed against the clouds. The rain eased, leaving behind a clean smell, like the earth itself was starting over. "Papa?" Alma whispered, half asleep. "Stimunt medium." "Are we going home now?" Malachi looked out into the mist, the memory of Ruth's voice fading at last into something gentler. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "We're going home." But behind them, deep in the canyon, thunder rolled again. Far off, yet familiar, a reminder that peace in the west never rode long without a shadow. By morning, the clouds had broken. A pale wash of gold spread across Thorn Creek, turning the wet roofs to glass and the mud roads to mirrors. Smoke rose from the chimneys like tired sighs, and the town, so long chained by silence, stirred with the slow rhythm of waking after fear. Judge Aurelia Stone stood on the courthouse steps, a blanket around her shoulders, her spectacles misted from the damp. Beside her, Marshal Rutledge unfolded a document sealed in red wax and laid it flat on the table before the crowd. "By order of the United States Territorial Office," he announced, "the business and holdings of Royce Maddox are hereby seized pending trial. The establishment known as Silver Jack Saloon will be closed and inventoried. Vernon Pike, under charge of fraud and unlawful trafficking, is remanded to custody." A murmur spread through the gathered townsfolk. Not outrage this time, but disbelief, the kind that came from seeing justice take a real shape. The marshal's men escorted Maddox forward. His wrists were bound, his fine coat smeared with the night's dust, but his eyes still burned like embers refusing to die. When Aurelia met his gaze, he gave a small, bitter smile. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Judge," he said softly. "The land don't remember paper, and ink don't stop hunger." "Maybe not," she replied, voice steady. "But it's a start. Every reckoning begins with a word written down." Doc Whitman handed her the old ledger, now wrapped in cloth. "Evidence logged," he said. "And there's a letter from Sheriff Dugan, confession of cooperation, signed and witnessed." "Where is he now?" Aurelia asked. "In the jailhouse," Doc said. "Wanted to turn himself in before someone else came knocking." The judge nodded. "Let him wait. The law's slow, but it walks." Malachi Boone stood near the edge of the crowd, hat in hand. Rain had washed the soot from his coat, leaving only the worn leather beneath. Ella stood beside him, a step behind, as though still unsure if she belonged there. Alma clung to his arm, chewing on the end of her braid, eyes wide at all the grown-up words being spoken. When Aurelia looked up from the documents, her gaze found him. "Mr. Boone," she said, "you did this town a service last night. Brought light where folks forgot to strike a match." Malachi shook his head slowly. "Just tried to do what should have been done long ago." "You did more than that," she said gently. "You gave them courage." He shifted his weight, embarrassed by the weight of praise. "Courage is a funny thing," he said. "Don't mean much till someone else sees it." Ella smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what we all were last night. Just folks finally lookin'. The judge's eyes softened. Perhaps. But justice can't live on courage alone. She lifted the sealed order again, its wax glinting in the sun. This is the first time Thorn Creek's had law that meant more than fear. Let's see if we can keep it. From behind the prisoners, Reverend Hattie's voice rose, strong and certain. We'll keep it, she said. We'll keep it with work and prayer. Maddox laughed once, low. Prayer don't plow fields. No, Hattie said, but it keeps men from burnin' them. The crowd rippled with a nervous kind of laughter. Light, uneasy, but laughter all the same. Marshal Rutledge turned to his deputies. Get them ready to ride. The court'll reconvene in the county seat. As they moved to obey, Maddox leaned closer to Malachi. His voice dropped to a hiss. You think this ends me, Boone? I built this town's backbone. When it breaks, they'll beg for the devil they knew. Malachi met his gaze without blinking. Maybe, he said, but not today. The marshal tugged the reins, and the horses started forward. The chains rattled once, sharp against the morning air, and then Maddox was gone, swallowed by the road's long dust. Silence followed, deep but clean. Judge Aurelia folded the papers and pressed the wax seal flat beneath her palm. The sound it made, a quiet crack, seemed to close more than just a document. When she looked up, her eyes had softened. Go home, all of you, she said. There's been enough standing still for one lifetime. The people began to drift apart, slow and uncertain, but lighter somehow. Malachi turned to Ella and Alma. Come on, he said softly. We've got chores waitin'. As they walked away, the wind lifted the corner of the judge's order. The red seal gleamed in the sun like a drop of blood turned to iron. And for the first time in years, Thorn Creek felt like a place that might heal. By the time they reached Boone's ranch, the morning had stretched into soft gold. The rain from the night before had left the earth dark and fragrant, and each hoof step gave a slow, wet sound, as if the land itself were sighing. The small farmhouse stood against the wide horizon, white paint peeling but stubbornly bright under the new sun. Fences leaned. The barn door hung crooked, yet everything breathed a tired kind of peace, the kind that asks nothing, promises only rest. Malachi swung down first, then reached to lift Alma from the saddle. The little girl's hair was still damp, her eyes rimmed with fatigue, but she smiled when her boots touched solid ground. Smells like home again, she said. Smells like wet horse and wood smoke, Malachi teased, setting her down gently. That's all home ever is. Ella followed, sliding down from the mare with careful hands. The coat he'd given her was too big, sleeves soaked and heavy, but she didn't mind. For the first time since he'd found her, there was color in her face. Not much, but enough to prove she still belonged to the living. Malachi untied the reins and led the horse into the barn. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay and oil and something older, quieter. The smell of work that never left a place. Ella followed him in, wordless, watching as he rubbed the mare down and hung the bridle. She wanted to thank him, but couldn't find a word that wouldn't sound small. He must have felt it, because he said, without turning, "You don't owe me speech, miss. Just rest." She hesitated. "I'm not sure I know how." He looked at her then, over his shoulder. Eyes soft but unreadable. Most of us forget, but it comes back. Outside, Alma's laughter broke the stillness. Thin, high, and pure, like a bird testing its wings after a storm. She'd found a stray chicken and was chasing it clumsily across the yard. Ella smiled despite herself. "You let her run like that?" "She needs to," he said. "The world's been holding her breath too long." They stepped out of the barn together. The air shimmered with warmth, rising from puddles that caught the sky. Alma stopped chasing the chicken and ran back toward them, a wildflower clutched in her fist. She handed it to Ella. "It's not much," she said shyly, "but it smells nice." Ella crouched down, accepting it like a gift of gold. "Thank you, sweetheart." Malachi watched, quiet, the corner of his mouth twitching toward a smile. "You'll spoil her with kind words," he said. "She's earned them." They went inside. The house was simple. Wood floors, rough-hewn table, the faint smell of tobacco and soap. A Bible on the mantel, a photograph beside it. A woman with kind eyes, hair pinned neatly back, one hand resting on the shoulder of a much younger Malachi. Ella paused before it. "Your wife?" He nodded once. "Sarah. Been gone near 3 years. She was lovely." "She was steady," he said. "That's rarer." For a long while they said nothing. Only the wind outside filled the room, brushing through the half-open window like a guest who didn't want to intrude. Malachi busied himself with the stove, coaxing a small fire to life. "You can rest in the loft," he said. "Blankets are clean enough. Roof leaks some, but only when it rains sideways." Ella looked up toward the narrow stairs, where light fell in angled bars. "I can help with supper first." He shook his head. "You've done enough talking and running. Sit. The world won't fall apart without you stirring it." But she didn't sit. She moved to the shelf, finding a pot and some dried beans, her fingers moving by instinct. "Cooking's not work," she said softly. "It's the one thing I can do that feels normal." He let her. Sometimes mercy meant not arguing. Alma climbed onto a stool, watching Ella sort the beans. "Papa says food tastes better when people like each other." Ella blinked at that, then smiled. "Your papa's a wise man." Malachi, pretending to busy himself with the kettle, said gruffly, "Your papa talks too much." The child giggled, and the sound filled the small house with something that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite prayer, but had the warmth of both. Later, when the stew was simmering and the sun leaned low through the windows, Malachi stepped out onto the porch. The world glowed copper. He sat on the edge of the steps, hat tilted back, watching the horizon breathe. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like running. Ella joined him quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee that smelled more like scorched hope than brew. She handed him one and sat a few feet away. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was gentle, like a blanket spread between weary souls. "I keep thinking," she said at last, "how strange it is, being alive when you were so sure you wouldn't be." He sipped his coffee, grimaced at the bitterness. "Stranger still is learning what to do with the time after." She nodded, tracing a finger along the rim of her cup. "Do you think people can start over?" He took a long breath. The fields stretched before them, gold turning to shadow, the sky bleeding its last color into the earth. "Starting over's just another way of saying you're still breathing," he said. "Ain't no shame in that." She turned to him then, and for a heartbeat, he saw her not as a burden or a reminder, but as a woman shaped by survival, by something fierce and quiet that refused to die. Inside, Alma began humming to herself, the kind of tune that had no beginning or end. "Your daughter's beautiful," Ella said. "She's the only proof I got that something good can live through bad weather." Ella looked out over the land. "Maybe she's not the only one." Malachi said nothing, but a muscle in his jaw worked. Some thought caught between pride and grief. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of sage and damp soil. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, lonely and low. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded letter, edges soft from years of being carried. He turned it over once, then placed it on the porch rail. "That's a letter I wrote Sarah," he said quietly. "Never sent it. Never knew how to say I was sorry for what I didn't know how to fix." Ella's voice was barely a whisper. "You gonna send it now?" He shook his head. "No. Think I'll leave it under the lamp inside. Maybe words don't need to travel far to find who they're meant for." She watched him for a long moment, then reached out and placed her hand lightly on the letter, fingers brushing his. "Then it's found you, too." The touch was brief, but it carried more comfort than any prayer. A cloud passed over the sun, dimming the world for a moment. And when the light returned, it was softer. Less about burning, more about warmth. Malachi exhaled, long and slow. "You stay here long as you need," he said. "Ain't much, but it's safe." Ella smiled faintly. "Safe's enough for now." Behind them, Alma's voice drifted from the doorway. "Papa, the stew's ready." They turned. The child stood there with a wooden spoon like a scepter, her face glowing in the lantern light. Malachi rose and held the door for Ella. Inside, the air smelled of thyme and rain-dried clothes, the kind of scent that makes a place feel lived in. As they sat at the table, Alma bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you for food and for today not being scary." Malachi's throat tightened. Ella glanced at him, eyes shining with something that might have been laughter or tears. It was hard to tell which. After supper, Alma fell asleep on the chair, arms wrapped around her father's old jacket. Malachi carried her to bed, tucked her in, and paused for a moment to watch her breathing. Soft, even, the miracle of ordinary peace. When he came back, Ella was at the table, writing quietly by lamplight. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Just a note," she said without looking up. "Something to remind me that today was real." He nodded. "It's real." Outside, the night spread gentle and wide. Crickets began their slow chorus. The rain smell faded to cool wind. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Malachi placed the unsent letter under it, just as he'd said. Then he sat down across from Ella. No words between them, only the quiet knowledge that sometimes survival itself was the closest thing to love. The house creaked, the fire sighed, and the prairie exhaled under the stars. For the first time in a long while, Thorn Creek slept, without fear. The morning broke white and wide, a clean page after the storm. Light spilled over Thorn Creek like it was washing the town in forgiveness. Every puddle gleamed, every roof shone. For the first time in memory, the air smelled only of rain and smoke, not fear. Malachi Boone stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands. The wind carried the slow toll of the church bell, steady, even, calling not for mourning, but for justice. Behind him, Ella appeared in the doorway, her voice soft. "They're ringing for the hearing?" He nodded. "Judge'll read the verdict. Maddox, Pike, Dugan, all of them." "Will you go?" He took a slow sip. "Reckon a man ought to finish what he starts." She smiled faintly. "Then I'll come with you." Alma appeared, hair tangled, cheeks full of bread. "Can we ride the bay mare?" Malachi chuckled. "Only if you hold tight." The girl grinned, and for a moment, the world felt light again. They rode toward town beneath a pale sky that promised peace. The fields glistened wet, alive. Townsfolk stood at their doors as the small family passed, no longer with suspicion, but with nods and half-smiles. The saloon windows were boarded now, its sign faded. Even silence sounded different in the morning. At the courthouse, the crowd gathered under the awning. Judge Aurelia Stone waited on the steps, Marshal Rutledge beside her, papers folded under his arm. When Malachi and Ella arrived, the murmur stilled. Aurelia lifted her voice, calm, steady, final. "By authority of the Territorial Office, Royce Maddox is found guilty of fraud, coercion, and attempted murder. His assets are seized, his property to be divided among the ranchers and workers he defrauded. Vernon Pike and Sheriff Dugan are likewise convicted." No one cheered. Western justice had no room for noise, but the crowd breathed as one, a long, trembling breath, like a town exhaling after years of holding it. Malachi felt Ella's hand brush his sleeve. It wasn't fear this time. It was something steadier. Acknowledgement. Faith. Judge Stone's gaze swept across them. "Law isn't what's written," she said. "It's what survives after the ink fades. Thorn Creek remembers now." Reverend Hattie raised her Bible. "We'll pray for those who chose courage and for those who couldn't." The bell rang once more. and for a moment, no one moved. Ella bent toward Alma. "You hear that?" The girl nodded solemnly. "Sounds like the world saying sorry." Malachi smiled. "Maybe it's saying thank you." The people lingered even after the verdict, talking, planning, remembering how to live without fear. Mei Chen took names for a new town council. Doc Whitman drew a map for a shared well. A new rhythm was beginning. When Judge Aurelia passed by, she paused before Malachi. "You'll stay?" He nodded. "For a while. There's fences need mendin', ground to turn." Her eyes softened. "Hearts, too, maybe." After she walked away, Ella looked up at him. "You think she's right? About hearts?" He tilted his hat. "They mend slow, but they do." They rode home under a sky so bright it stung the eyes. Alma fell asleep against Ella's shoulder, safe for once in her small world. The house rose from the field ahead, humble and kind. Inside, the quiet greeted them like an old friend. Ella helped hang laundry, pinning each shirt carefully, while Malachi fixed the loose latch on the porch door. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and damp soil. "She'll sleep hard tonight," Ella said. "She's earned it," he answered. "Maybe we all have." He looked at her then, sunlight soft on her face. The lines of hardship were still there, but something new lived beneath them. Peace. "Stay a while," he said. "Ain't much, but it's home." Her smile came slow and real. "I was already planning to." He didn't answer, just went inside, took the old letter from under the lamp, his unsent words to Sarah, and opened it. The page smelled faintly of tobacco and thyme. "If forgiveness ever finds me, I'll know by the sound of quiet," he'd once written. Now he added, "It found me." Then he signed his name. Outside, Alma called, "Papa! Miss Ella! Come look!" They stepped onto the porch. Along the fence line, small white daisies had burst from the damp soil, their faces turned to the sun. "Look," Ella whispered, "even the land's startin' again." Malachi crouched beside Alma, brushing the petals. "Guess it figures the world's tired of dyin'." The child plucked one and tucked it behind Ella's ear. "Now you look like home." Ella laughed softly, the sound lifting into the light. Malachi reached up, tipping his hat toward her. "Reckon that's what we are now," he said. The noon sun fell clean across them. No shadows, no thunder left behind. The wind ran through the grass, carrying the scent of rain and wildflowers. For a long moment, they stood together. Three souls made whole by everything they had survived. Malachi closed his eyes and breathed deep. The air tasted of earth and forgiveness. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to be alive. And above them, in the blinding white of noon, the land seemed to promise quietly, "You've made it home." In a land where dust and wind once carried only sorrow, peace finally found its way home. Malachi, Ella, and little Alma reminded us that redemption isn't a grand event. It's made of small mercies, quiet courage, and the simple act of standing beside one another. Maybe that's what the West was always meant to teach us, that even after loss, there's room for love. Even after silence, there's room for song. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell us in the comments, what moment stayed with you the most? Was it the courage to speak when no one else did, or the calm that follows forgiveness? Your reflections mean the world to us. Give this story a like if you believe kindness can still change a life. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next tale of hope, love, and second chances in the Old West. We share stories that warm the heart and honor the strength of ordinary folks, just like you. So sit back, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and join us again next time, where every sunset carries another story worth remembering.